Hey everyone. Welcome back to Eclipse Wizardry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Sorting Hat revealed Harry had 7 soulmates and ancient magic forced them to find him? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Mark. The Sorting Hat smelled like old books and something older than that, like the inside of a church that had been standing since before anyone remembered building it. Harry only noticed because it dropped over his eyes and took his vision entirely, leaving him alone in the sudden dark with something that was already riffling through his thoughts like fingers through a card catalog. Interesting, it said, and its voice wasn't a sound so much as a pressure behind his ears. Very interesting. I haven't seen this in, just put me somewhere, Harry thought at it, because the whole hall was watching and his neck was already hot with it. You don't understand what you're carrying, do you, boy? It wasn't a question. Harry didn't bother answering it like one. No, the hat continued, and there was something in its tone that hadn't been there a moment before, something that felt disturbingly close to awe. No, you genuinely don't. You walked in here with no idea. How extraordinary. How absolutely, Hat, Harry thought firmly. House. Please. In a moment. And then it went quiet in a way that felt less like silence and more like held breath. Harry could feel it doing something, not reading him anymore, but reading something around him, the way you'd read weather by the way light changes before a storm. Oh, it said softly. Oh, this hasn't happened since Rowena was alive. This hasn't, child. Do you understand that you are carrying a mark? Not a curse. Not a gift, exactly. Something far more fundamental than either. Harry opened his mouth inside the privacy of his own skull. What kind of mark? The kind that doesn't ask permission, the hat said. And then, with something that sounded genuinely reluctant, like it was watching something it couldn't stop and wasn't sure it should try to, the mark of the 7. Ancient magic, boy. The oldest kind. And it has already chosen. The silence in the great hall had gone from anticipatory to uneasy. Harry had been under the hat for nearly a full minute. McGonagall's hand twitched toward her scroll. At the Gryffindor table, Percy Weasley was timing it. At the Hufflepuff table, a fifth-year prefect with kind eyes and a Diggory badge had stopped eating and was watching the stool with a slight frown, because something at the back of his sternum had started doing something odd about 40 seconds ago, something that felt less like heartburn and more like recognition. Cedric Diggory pressed 2 fingers to his chest and breathed through it. In the Ravenclaw first-year cluster waiting to be sorted, a small blonde girl with radish earrings and wide silver eyes had gone completely still. She'd been still since before the doors opened, actually. Since breakfast. Since the train. If her dorm mates at home had been paying attention, which they usually weren't, they'd have noticed she'd been still since August, in the particular focused way she got when she was listening to something nobody else could hear. Luna Lovegood was not surprised by any of this. She had, in fact, packed an extra jumper, because she'd known it would be a cold night. The hat made its decision. Gryffindor. And then, before Harry could even start to lift it from his head, before the Gryffindor table could do more than draw a collective breath to cheer, the hat did something it had not done in 1012 years. It kept talking. Not to Harry. To the room. Its voice came from everywhere at once, rolling out of the ancient stone walls like it was being spoken by the castle itself, deep and resonant and utterly impossible to talk over. I must speak, for the magic demands it be known. The boy who sits before me carries the mark of the 7, an ancient bond not seen since the Founder's age. 7 souls in this world are bound to him by a thread older than this school, older than the families that built it, older than the names you carry. The bond is not a choice. It is a recognition. And it has already begun. Those who carry the thread will know it. They know it now. Complete silence. And then the most extraordinary thing happened, which was nothing, for about 3 full seconds. Pure, crystalline nothing, while 1,000 years of magical tradition caught up with what had just been said. Then the great hall exploded. Harry pulled the hat off his own head, because nobody was coming to do it, and McGonagall was standing with her mouth open, actually open, like a door someone had forgotten to close, which he suspected was not a common look for her. He set the hat carefully back on its stool and walked to the Gryffindor table through a wall of noise, found a space at the end of the bench, and sat down. The boy next to him, round face, wide eyes, a toad clutched to his chest like a talisman, turned and stared with an expression that had moved past shock into something quieter. Something wondering. "Hello," Harry said. "Hi," said Neville Longbottom. He pressed his free hand flat against his sternum, where something warm had taken up residence approximately 90 seconds ago and didn't show any sign of leaving. I think I might be," the hat said. "Yeah," Harry said. He didn't fully understand it either, but there was something about the warmth spreading from the other boy's direction that made him feel less like the floor was tilting. "I know." Across the hall, at the Hufflepuff table, Cedric Diggory had put down his fork entirely. The sensation in his chest had become less ambiguous and more directional, which was a deeply strange thing for a chest sensation to be. It pulled, gently, insistently, the way a compass needle pulls north, toward the first year who had just sat at the Gryffindor table and was now speaking quietly to Neville Longbottom with the composure of someone who had decided, apparently, not to have a crisis about this tonight. Cedric found, somewhat to his own surprise, that his own crisis was receding too. Hannah Abbott leaned over. Said. "Are you okay? You went pale." "I'm fine," he said. Yeah. I'm fine." He looked back at the first-year table. Harry Potter met his eyes across the vast distance of the Great Hall, and for a single moment the noise of 800 students arguing about ancient magic didn't exist. The pull between them was like a plucked string, vibrating at a frequency Cedric felt in his back teeth. He nodded once. Harry nodded back, and returned his attention to the sorting, which was struggling to resume because Professor McGonagall had finally collected herself, was banging her scroll against the edge of the stool, and was deploying the kind of voice that made students sit down reflexively even when they didn't know what they'd done wrong. "The sorting will continue," she announced, and her tone left no room for the subject to be revisited tonight. "Granger, Hermione." The girl who marched up to the stool was all brown hair and determined shoulders, and she settled the hat on her own head with the air of someone completing a task she'd researched thoroughly. The hat barely touched her before it called Gryffindor, but in those 3 seconds, Hermione Granger felt something land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Concentric rings of it, spreading outward. Logical, impossible, verifiable, infuriating. She sat down across the table from Harry and Neville and looked directly at Harry with an expression that said, "I am going to need to understand everything about this, and I am going to start immediately." Harry, who was 11 and had been living in a cupboard 6 weeks ago, said, "Hi. I'm Harry." "I know who you are," Hermione said. "I've read about you. But I've also now read, well, I've partly read about the Mark of the Seven. There were only 2 pages in Hogwarts, a history, but it was enough to know that what the hat just described it's real, it's documented, it's not been observed in over 1,000 years, and it means we're connected," Neville said quietly. He stroked his toad. "I could feel it. When you walked up to the stool." Hermione closed her mouth. Opened it. Closed it again. "Yes," she finally said. "That's a succinct way to put it." She looked at Harry again, and something in her expression shifted from intellectual assessment to something more personal and considerably more uncertain. "Are you frightened?" "Of what?" Harry said. She blinked. Of all of this. The attention. The bond. The fact that, there's always been attention, Harry said, not bitterly, just factually. "And I didn't ask for the bond. But it's there." He shrugged. "Being frightened of it doesn't seem like it would help." Hermione stared at him for another moment. Then she nodded, opened her bag, extracted a small notebook, and began writing in it with quick, precise strokes, because if she couldn't process emotions she could more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, the dungeon smelled like cold stone and something alchemical, sulfur and preserved things, and the particular damp that never quite left no matter how many warming charms you cast. Severus Snape stood at the window of his office and looked at nothing, because the window faced an underwater view of the Black Lake and there was nothing to see at this hour except darkness pressing against glass. He had a glass of fire whiskey he hadn't touched. The Mark of the Seven. He turned the words over like stones, examining what was underneath. He'd known the theory, every serious magical scholar knew the theory, the way you knew the theory of spontaneous magical combustion or the migration patterns of Antipodean opalies. You knew it as a category of thing that existed in old books and not in the world. The kind of knowledge that felt purely academic until the moment it wasn't. He thought about the boy's face when the hat had spoken. He'd been watching, because he always watched, because watching was the entirety of what he did in rooms like that great hall. And what he'd seen was, not fear. Not the performance of fearlessness either, which was what you got from students who'd been raised to believe their own mythology. Just a kind of flat, practical acceptance that Snape associated with people who'd learned early that the world was going to do what it did regardless of your feelings about it. He finally drank the fire whiskey. He didn't like what that observation made him think about the boy's life before Hogwarts. Harry woke at 2 in the morning to find that the dormitory was dark and quiet and something in his chest was pulling northwest. He lay still for a moment, cataloging it. It wasn't pain. It was orientation. The way he imagined a migrating bird might feel when the season changed and something in its blood said that way, that direction, something is waiting that direction. He counted the threads of it, because he could feel them now that the castle was quiet and he wasn't surrounded by 800 people all radiating magical signatures. There were 7 distinct, not quite feelings, not quite sounds. More like voices in an adjacent room, muffled but present. He could feel Neville 6 feet away in the next bed, warm and slow with sleep, and 2 others somewhere in the tower above, Hermione on this floor, 1 level up, he thought, because her thread felt like a candle rather than a hearth, precise and deliberate even in sleep. Neville's was the hearth. Steady and deep. The others were further. 2 together, Fred and George, though he hadn't connected those names to threads yet, somewhere in the upper floors, a bright chaotic double note that even at 2 in the morning felt like the opening bars of a song that was about to get out of hand. 1 somewhere below and to the east, which he'd later understand was Cedric in the Hufflepuff basement, steady as a drumbeat. And 2 more at distances that felt wrong, too far, like they were somewhere beyond the castle walls, which didn't make sense and which his exhausted brain filed under investigate later. He fell back asleep. He dreamed of a door made of silver light and something standing behind it that wasn't quite a person, watching him the way the hat had watched him, with recognition, and something that felt disturbingly like relief. "You need to sit down," Fred said. "I am sitting down," George replied. "You're hovering 6 inches above the bench. That's levitation, not sitting." "I'm experiencing," George said with dignity, "an unusual gravitational relationship with my chair." They were at breakfast, which had begun with the usual chaos of post-first night excitement amplified by approximately 10,000% by the events of the previous evening. Every table in the great hall was a different ongoing argument. Harry could hear fragments of it. "Never happened since the Founders, it's got to be dark magic, my mum wrote last night and said the Ministry's already." He tuned most of it out because he had a more immediate problem, which was that Fred Weasley had just sat down directly across from him and was looking at him with an expression that was half apology and half like a dog who'd seen something and couldn't stop thinking about it. "So," Fred said. "About the thing." "The thing," Harry agreed. "In our chests. That started last night." George dropped into the seat beside his brother with the resigned air of someone who'd spent several hours trying to logic his way out of an emotion and failed. "Which we've concluded is, you." Pointing at you. "Like a compass but for people?" Neville offered. "We were going to say chaos," Fred said, "but people works." Harry looked at them both. He'd noticed them on the train, hard not to notice them. They'd been performing a trick with a purple firework in the corridor that had turned 3 compartment doors temporarily into curtains, and he'd felt the threat of them then without knowing what it was. Now that he was looking directly at them, the double note was unmistakable. Like a harmonic. 2 frequencies too close together to separate. The hat said 7, Harry said. You two count as one. Fred and George exchanged a look that lasted about half a second and contained, Harry suspected, an entire conversation. Apparently, George said, and he sounded, not offended. More like someone who'd been told they'd won a prize they'd been hoping for but hadn't expected. Ancient magic has classified us as a unit. We're choosing to take it as a compliment. It is a compliment, Harry said simply, and went back to his porridge. Fred stared at him. You're remarkably calm about all of this. People keep saying that. People are right. Harry shrugged. I grew up in a cupboard under the stairs. My relatives didn't tell me I was a wizard until Hagrid showed up and broke down their door. Compared to all of that, finding out I'm magically connected to 7 people who seem fairly decent seems like a good morning. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when someone says something that sounds casual but lands with the weight of something it took years to carry. George opened his mouth. Don't, Fred said quietly, without looking at his brother. George closed his mouth. Right, Fred said, and reached across the table to refill Harry's pumpkin juice with the studied nonchalance of someone doing something deliberate and pretending not to be. Well. We're the Weasley twins. Fred and George, though the ordering is disputed, it's not disputed, George said. And we have decided, after roughly 4 hours of debate in our dormitory, that we're fine with this. Fred tapped his own chest, indicating the thread. More than fine, actually. Because honestly, Potter, the alternative was spending 7 years of school being remarkable without anyone remarkable to be remarkable for, and that sounded exhausting. Harry looked at him steadily. You'd have been remarkable anyway. Fred blinked. Well. He cleared his throat. Yes. Obviously. But it's nicer with an audience. Hermione found him after breakfast, which he had not doubted she would, because Hermione Granger moved through obstacles, including large breakfasting crowds, with the force of someone who had a mission and found the concept of in my way fairly theoretical. She had a book under one arm and her small notebook in her hand, and she was already talking before she reached him. The mark of the 7 appears in exactly 4 primary sources, she said, falling into step beside him as he headed for the entrance hall. Neville drifted along on his other side, because Neville had started doing that this morning, not clingy, just present. Easy about it, like it was natural. Rowena Ravenclaw's personal journals, which are in the restricted section, Bathilda Bagshot mentions it in a footnote in A History of Magic on page 412, there are 3 pages in Ancient Magics of the British Isles which is also restricted, and there's a fresco in the east wing on the 4th floor that depicts it, though most students think it's just decorative. Is it decorative? Neville asked. Absolutely not. It's a historical record. I went and looked at it at 6 this morning. Harry glanced at her. You were up at 6. I was up at 4, she said, with the air of someone making a confession but not an apology. The bond woke me. Which is, actually relevant, because that means it operates below conscious awareness, which means it's neurological or it's fundamental, it's not just a magical connection She stopped walking, turned to face them both, notebook open. The last child who carried the mark lived in 986 AD. His name was Aldrich. He was sorted into all 4 houses simultaneously, which Hogwarts couldn't actually do, so instead the castle grew him a room that was equidistant between all 4 towers. His 7 bonded souls included 3 students from the school, 2 from the continent, and, she paused, 1 who wasn't a student at all. 1 who was significantly older. What happened to him? Neville asked. Hermione's expression flickered. The account ends. Abruptly. She looked at Harry. I'd like to access the restricted section. The full journals are there. And I think we need to know everything in them before someone else decides to tell us a version of it. Before Dumbledore decides to tell us a version of it, Harry said. Hermione paused, then said carefully, I didn't say that. You didn't not say it either. She looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook. You're quite perceptive for someone who's been in the magical world for 3 days. I'm perceptive for someone who spent 10 years learning to read rooms, Harry said. He started walking again. Dumbledore knew something was going to happen last night. I could see it in how he watched the hat. He wasn't surprised. He was managing. Neville's brow furrowed. You got all that from looking at him? You get a lot from looking at people when you've spent years trying to figure out if the person in the house is in a good enough mood to ask them for dinner. Neither of them said anything to that. They just walked with him, warm and present on either side, and Harry felt the threads of them hum something that wasn't quite comfort but was close to it, a sort of fundamental okayness about the day that he wasn't used to feeling and didn't quite trust yet but also wasn't going to argue with. The fresco was in a corridor that most students ignored because it was cold and the stone floor sloped slightly toward the east wall, making walking feel like a subtle argument. Harry stood in front of it at 9:15, while the rest of the school was at their first class of the year, and looked at it. Hermione had been right, not decorative. It was a painting rather than a fresco, actually, done in pigments that had barely faded in 1,000 years, which meant they'd been fixed with magic so fundamental they'd probably outlast the castle. A figure at the center, a child, young, maybe Harry's age, surrounded by 7 others in a loose configuration that wasn't quite a circle and wasn't quite a star. The figures were rendered without distinct faces, which was strange for this kind of historical art, but the postures were clear. Some were reaching toward the central figure. One was standing slightly apart, looking at the others with an expression the artist had somehow conveyed through body language alone, something between assessment and resignation, like someone who had come late to a conclusion everyone else had already reached. The 7 threads of light between them were depicted as literal silver lines, glowing with a warmth that the paint had somehow preserved, and they converged not on the child's chest, where Harry had assumed they'd be, but on his hands. Harry said. What? Said a voice behind him. He turned. In the doorway of the corridor, leaning against the stone with her arms loose at her sides and her radish earrings catching the torchlight, was a girl he hadn't been introduced to yet. 2nd year, he guessed. Ravenclaw robes. Silver-gray eyes that were looking at him with the same quality of attention he'd felt in his chest since the previous night, the faraway thread that had felt too distant, and was now, he realized, not distant at all. She'd been moving toward him since breakfast. She'd just been taking her time. You noticed where the threads end, she said, nodding at the fresco. The hands, Harry said. Yes. She came to stand beside him and looked at the painting with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd visited it before. The bond doesn't sit in the chest, technically. That's just where you feel it because that's where humans experience emotion. The actual seat of it is the hands. Rowena Ravenclaw wrote that the mark-bearer channels ancient magic manually, through physical contact, through direct act. Not through a wand. She glanced at him. Her expression was calm in the way deep water was calm, not stillness, just depth. I'm Luna. Luna Lovegood. Harry, he said. Though you probably know that. I've known you were coming since August, she said easily, like this was a perfectly normal thing to say. The Nargles were different over the summer. More purposeful. She tilted her head. You felt me from the dormitory, didn't you? Last night. 2 threads that were the wrong distance. I didn't know that was you. Me and one other, she said. The other is much further. She's across the channel. She said it matter-of-factly. She'll come. The bond will pull her here eventually. It always finds a way. Harry turned to fully face her. How do you know all of this? Luna considered the question with genuine thoughtfulness, like she was sorting through possible answers rather than formulating a single one. My mother was a very unusual witch, she said finally. She studied old magic. Things most people think are theoretical. She told me about the mark before she died, not because she knew it would happen to me, but because she thought it was beautiful and she liked sharing beautiful things. She paused. She was right. It is beautiful. Something about the matter-of-fact way she said before she died made Harry's chest do something complicated. He didn't pry. He recognized the particular quality of that sentence, the way it was delivered, like a door that was closed but not locked, like, "I'll tell you more if you ask but I won't make you." The hands, he said, looking back at the fresco. What does that mean, practically? For how the magic works? Luna's expression brightened with something close to delight. It means, she said, that when you touch something with intent, you're not just doing magic. You're doing old magic. The kind the castle is made of. The kind that built the Sorting Hat. She glanced at his hands. Have you tried anything yet? Since last night? I haven't had time. She nodded, as if this was sensible. Then she reached out, very simply, and took his left hand in both of hers. Her grip was light and dry and completely without self-consciousness. Try something, she said. Nothing dramatic. Just, feel the castle. Ask it something. Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the fresco. Then, because it seemed as reasonable as anything else he'd done in the last 24 hours, he pressed his free hand flat against the painted stone. The castle answered. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was more like pressure. Like a held breath that had been held for 1,000 years, letting go slowly, carefully, the way you'd exhale around something delicate. He felt the floors, all 7 of them, felt the staircases that moved and the ones that didn't, felt the hidden rooms and the rooms that weren't rooms, felt a chamber far below that was old in a way the rest of the castle wasn't, old in a way that made the dungeons feel new. He felt 7 specific points of warmth, the threads, alive and distinct, scattered through the building like lights in a darkened map. He felt something else too. Something watching. Not the castle. Not the threads. Something colder, in the northwest tower, tucked behind layers of careful concealment, the magical equivalent of a bad smell hidden under perfume. He pulled his hand back. Luna was watching him. Well, she said quietly. That was fast. There's something in the northwest tower, he said. Something wrong. She nodded slowly. I've been feeling it since the train, she said. Like a shadow in the wrong direction. She squeezed his hand once and let go. Don't go there alone. I wasn't going to, Harry said, though he'd been half considering exactly that. The certainty in her voice rerouted the impulse before it finished forming. Right. How do we get into the restricted section? They couldn't get into the restricted section. Not legitimately, not on a Tuesday in their first week, with Madame Pants watching the entrance like a portrait of professional suspicion given human form. Hermione spent 20 minutes composing a request to McGonagall and received, by dinner, a note that said the request was being considered but could not be approved without demonstrated academic necessity, which Hermione described as bureaucratic obstruction and McGonagall would have described as appropriate institutional process, and which Harry filed under obstacle to work around. He was not distressed by this. He'd been working around obstacles since he could walk. Dinner was loud in the specific way of a castle that was still processing yesterday. Harry ate and listened and watched Cedric Diggory across the hall. The Hufflepuff prefect was at his table in close conversation with 2 friends, but every few minutes his gaze would drift, precisely, unfailingly, to Harry. Not with hostility. With something more like a person checking that a window they'd left open was still intact. Reassurance seeking. Harry understood that. He caught Cedric's gaze on the 4th drift, held it, and jerked his head slightly toward the entrance hall. Cedric's expression did something brief and complicated. Then he nodded. They met in the entrance hall at 7, in the natural dead spot between the end of dinner and the beginning of the evening rush of students heading to common rooms and libraries. Cedric came alone, which Harry appreciated. He had 2 inches and 4 years on Harry, and he moved like someone who'd learned early that his size could be either threatening or reassuring and had made a deliberate choice about which one. "Harry," he said, and put out his hand. Harry shook it. The moment their hands touched, the thread between them, the steady drumbeat thread, sang once, clear and resonant, and they both felt it, and neither of them pretended they hadn't. "Right," Cedric said. He exhaled. "That's very real, isn't it?" "Pretty real," Harry agreed. Cedric leaned against the stone wall with the careful posture of someone trying to look less like a prefect than he currently felt. "How are you handling all of this?" "Genuinely. You've been in the wizarding world for, what, a week?" "And now, 3 days," Harry said. "And honestly? It's a lot. But it's also," he stopped, trying to find the right words. "Everything in my life before this was small," he said finally. "My bedroom was a cupboard. I didn't know magic existed until recently. I didn't know I had any of this." He pressed 2 fingers briefly to his own chest, where the threads hummed. "Having more than I expected doesn't frighten me. Having more than I expected is basically all that's happened since I turned 11. Cedric watched him for a moment with the kind of quiet, careful attention that good listeners had, the kind that made the thing you just said feel heard rather than just received. "You're going to be interesting to know, Harry Potter," he said. "You might regret that," Harry said. Cedric smiled. It was a good smile, it reached his eyes without asking you to comment on the fact that it did. "I doubt it." He glanced up the staircase toward the upper floors. "Fred and George came to find me after breakfast. They said you're trying to get into the restricted section." Harry raised his eyebrows slightly. "They did they? They also said, and I quote, 'We have a plan but it requires someone who looks responsible, which rules us both out.'" Cedric's smile widened. "I am a 5th-year prefect. I look extremely responsible. Can you actually get us in?" "I cannot," Cedric said pleasantly. "But I know that Filch's key ring, the one with the restricted section master key, hangs on the 3rd hook from the left in his office, and I also know that he patrols the 4th floor on Tuesday and Thursday evenings between 8 and half 9. He paused. "I'm not telling you to do anything with that information." "Absolutely not," Harry said. "Glad we understand each other," Cedric said. The restricted section smelled like secrets kept past their use-by date. Hermione cast a muffliato she'd read about in intermediate spellwork. She'd read 5 chapters ahead on the train, and Neville held the lantern while Harry found the shelf. Luna had told him the title from memory, Annals of Ancient Bonds, Volume 7, and it was exactly where she'd said it would be, 3rd shelf from the floor, behind a copy of Hexes and Their Afterlives that had been placed in front of it deliberately, which was interesting in itself. Fred and George stood watch at either end of the row, because apparently they'd done this before. The ease with which they'd navigated the restricted sections ward suggested practice, and Cedric stood at the door to the room proper, maintaining the perfect posture of someone who was absolutely not here. Hermione opened the book with hands that were trying very hard not to be reverent and mostly failing. It was handwritten. The script was cramped and lateral, Ravenclaw's hand, according to the header, and it smelled of something dry and warm, like autumn leaves, which was impossible because it should have smelled like the same dead damp as everything else in here, which meant the magic in it was preserving something about it that normal preservation charms didn't preserve. Harry leaned over Hermione's shoulder. Neville leaned over his. The account of Aldrich was 40 pages. Hermione began reading with the focused speed of someone consuming information rather than savoring it, and Harry read alongside her and watched her face rather than the page, because Hermione's face was a reasonably reliable index of the content's alarmingness. Her face became alarming fairly quickly. What? Neville said. The 7 bond bearers aren't just connected to the mark carrier, Hermione said slowly. The bond makes them stronger. Individually. All 7 of them, and the mark carrier, grow in magical capacity as the bond deepens. Ravenclaw says, she traced the line with her finger, that by the time Aldrich's bond was fully established, his magic had surpassed any of the more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 3, The Weight of Old Things. The passage Hermione had stopped on read, in Ravenclaw's cramped lateral hand, by the time the bond was fully established, the child's magic had surpassed any of the 4 founders in raw capacity, though not in discipline or understanding. This is the nature of the mark, it does not grant power so much as it removes the ceiling on power already present. What was there becomes more. What could have been becomes inevitable. The danger is not the power itself but the attention of those who would rather see such a thing controlled than free. Hermione read it twice. Then she closed the book with both hands, carefully, like she was making sure it knew she respected it. Right, she said. Right, Harry said. Neville looked between them. That's actually terrifying. It's clarifying, Harry said, which was not the same thing as disagreeing with Neville. Fred appeared at the end of the row. Filch is coming back early. Something's upset Mrs. Norris on the 4th floor, which is suspicious timing. Suspicious how? George appeared from the other direction. Suspicious like someone sent her there to upset her, Fred said. Harry stood up from his crouch by the shelf and replaced the book, Hexes and Their Afterlives, back in front of it, exactly as they'd found it. He felt the threat of wrongness from the northwest tower even from here, a cold directional pull that hadn't gone away since he'd felt it with his hand on the fresco. If anything, it was stronger tonight. Whatever was in that tower knew they'd been reading. That was an uncomfortable thought. He put it somewhere useful. Go, Cedric said from the door, very quietly. They went. Dumbledore's office summoned Harry at 8 the next morning via a small scroll delivered at breakfast by a phoenix Harry hadn't known Dumbledore had, which was exactly the kind of entrance the headmaster apparently favored. The scroll was written in purple ink and used 3 more words than necessary for every sentence it contained, which Harry had already come to recognize as a stylistic signature. He went alone, because the scroll said to come alone, and because he was curious rather than nervous, which Hermione said made him either very brave or very poorly calibrated, and Harry thought it might be both. The gargoyle guarding the staircase said sherbet lemon before Harry could say anything, which meant Dumbledore had pre-entered the password, which meant Dumbledore had been certain Harry would come. Harry filed that under things to think about and went up the revolving stairs. The office was exactly what it should have been, circular, warm, full of spinning and clicking things that had no obvious purpose, portraits of old headmasters sleeping or pretending to sleep, and a general atmosphere of calculated whimsy that was doing a lot of work to make the room feel friendly and not particularly like a place where decisions got made. Fawkes, on his perch in the corner, looked at Harry with one dark intelligent eye and made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite a note of music, more like the promise of one. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and he looked old in a way that headmasters usually didn't look until you were much older yourself and could appreciate it. The kind of old that meant years rather than age, specifically the kind of years that included loss. Harry, he said warmly. Sit down, please. Would you like a sherbet lemon? No thank you, Harry said, and sat, and looked at Dumbledore with the same calm directness he'd been applying to everything since he arrived, which seemed to disconcert people who expected something more deferential. You wanted to see me. I did, Dumbledore said. He folded his hands on the desk and regarded Harry with an expression that was warm and intelligent and doing something layered underneath both of those things. I wanted to speak with you about what happened at the sorting. The mark, Harry said. Just so. Dumbledore tilted his head fractionally. You don't seem distressed. Being distressed wouldn't change what it is, Harry said. No, Dumbledore agreed. No, I suppose it wouldn't. He was quiet for a moment, looking at Harry with an expression that was doing something Harry couldn't quite read, which was unusual, because Harry was generally quite good at reading expressions. "I should tell you, Harry, that the mark of the 7 is not unknown to me." "I know," Harry said. A pause. "You know. You weren't surprised when the hat announced it. You were managing." Harry kept his voice matter-of-fact. There's a difference between someone hearing unexpected news and someone receiving confirmation of something they'd already prepared for. You already knew. The portraits on the walls, several of which had stopped pretending to be asleep, stirred with interest. Dumbledore's expression shifted, not to discomfort, exactly, but to the look of a man recalibrating a conversation he thought he'd had the shape of. "You are perceptive," he said, and unlike when Hermione had said it, it didn't sound entirely like a compliment. More like a recognition that contained its own complications. "What do you know about it?" Harry said. "All of it. Not the version you've decided I should hear." Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that the nearest portrait, a heavy-set wizard Harry didn't recognize, cleared his throat pointedly. Dumbledore glanced at it with fond irritation. "I know," he said finally, "that the mark of the 7 has not appeared since Aldric of Northumbria in 986 AD. I know that the Ministry of Magic, were they to learn of it in full, which they will, because these things cannot be contained, will respond with the particular kind of institutional fear that expresses itself as control. They will want to study it. To document it. To manage it." He said manage with the same inflection Harry had been applying to the word all morning. "I know that the last child to carry the mark fundamentally altered the course of magical Britain, which is both extraordinary and a considerable burden to place on an 11-year-old. And?" Harry said, because that wasn't all of it. He could feel it, not with the ancient magic, just with the instinct of someone who'd learned to listen for what people chose not to say. Dumbledore met his eyes. "And I have been aware since your birth that you were unusual, Harry. Not simply because of Voldemort. Because of what you were before he chose you." He paused. "Your mother's sacrifice created a protection rooted in ancient magic. Love as a fundamental force. When that magic intersected with what Voldemort cast, he stopped. The mark was dormant in you until you crossed the threshold of Hogwarts. This castle's magic recognized what you carried and woke it." Harry sat with this for a moment. "You could have told me before the sorting." "I could have," Dumbledore said. He didn't explain why he hadn't. "You wanted to see what it would do on its own," Harry said. "Without coaching." Dumbledore's expression did something brief and complicated that was honest in a way his words hadn't been. "I wanted to see what you would do on its own," he said quietly. "And I see that my caution was perhaps," he paused, choosing words, "not the only approach that might have served you well. It was the closest thing to an apology that was apparently available." Harry accepted it as the currency it was, limited but real. "The restricted section book," Harry said. "Ravenclaw's journals. It says the mark-bearer's power has no ceiling once the bond is established." Dumbledore didn't ask how Harry had accessed the restricted section. "That is accurate," he said. "And it says the danger is people who want to control it rather than let it be free. Also accurate." "Are you one of those people?" Harry said. Directly, without heat, just as a question that needed answering. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Fawkes made that sound again, the promise of music. "I hope not," Dumbledore said. "I have been, in the past, guilty of believing that protection and control were the same thing. I am working on that distinction." He looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses. "What I will tell you is this: there is a threat in this castle that I am aware of and that I am monitoring. I would ask that you leave it to you." Harry said. "Proceed carefully," Dumbledore said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. Harry stood up. "I'll be careful," he said, which was also not the same thing. "Thank you for telling me what you did, Harry." Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. The bond will continue to strengthen as the year progresses. What you felt last night at the fresco, that was a fraction of it. What it becomes, he paused. Be patient with the people it's found. Some of them are not yet ready for what it will ask of them. Harry looked back at him. I'll be patient, he said. But I won't be small about it. He left the office with Dumbledore sitting very still behind his desk, and two portrait wizards exchanging a glance that contained equal parts alarm and something that might have been, in the portrait world's muted way, excitement. Luna was waiting for him at the bottom of the gargoyle stairs. She had a copy of the Quibbler open and was reading it upside down, which Harry was coming to understand was her default orientation for the magazine. How was it? She said, falling into step beside him without looking up. Informative in unexpected ways, Harry said. He knows more than he's saying. But he's not the enemy. He's something more complicated than that. Most interesting people are, Luna said. He said the Northwest Tower thing is something he's monitoring. Harry glanced sideways at her. You've been feeling it since the train. What do you actually think it is? Luna lowered the Quibbler. She had a look on her face that was serious in a way she usually kept behind her general atmosphere of dreamy detachment, the kind of serious that meant she'd been thinking about this for a while and had arrived somewhere she didn't particularly like. Something that shouldn't be wearing the body it's wearing, she said. Do you know what I mean by that? Something in a space it's only partly filling. Like, you know how a cup that used to hold hot tea still smells like tea even when it's empty? This is the opposite of that. This is a cup that smells like something that was never tea, pretending it was. Harry thought about the cold directional pull. The thing hiding behind layers of concealment. A person who isn't entirely a person, he said. Yes, Luna said simply. And it knows we've noticed. They walked through a shaft of morning light coming through a high window, and Harry felt the threads of his bond-bearers moving through the castle's day, Hermione in the library with a stack of books already, Neville in herbology discovering something that made his thread bloom with sudden delighted warmth, Fred and George somewhere above them emanating the specific quality of people who were being very quiet on purpose, which from them was somehow louder than noise. Cedric was in a classroom. Anchored, steady, the drumbeat. The two far threads, Fleur, though he still didn't know her name, and someone else, someone very far, pulled at the edges of his awareness like tides. Luna, he said. The other far one. The one that isn't across the channel. Luna tucked the Quibbler under her arm. That one is close, she said, which was the first time she'd mentioned it. Getting closer. She's in Scotland. I think she'll be here by, soon. She didn't elaborate, and Harry didn't push, because with Luna there was a quality to her pauses that told you when the information was complete. The first time Harry did something in class that he wasn't supposed to be able to do yet, it was in charms, and it was an accident. Flitwick was covering the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, which Harry had practiced approximately 6 times in Hermione's company over the previous 2 evenings and had gotten to the point where his feather rose about 4 inches and trembled uncertainly, which Hermione said was perfectly adequate for day 3. He was sitting with Neville, who was holding his wand like someone trying not to startle it, and they'd been practicing for about 8 minutes when Hermione, 3 desks over, made a sharp sound of triumph as her feather shot to the ceiling. Harry looked at her. He felt the warmth of her thread flare with satisfaction, and without thinking, without wand motion, without incantation, he let that feeling travel, down through his hands, which were flat on the desk because he'd put his wand down to watch her, and every feather in the room rose simultaneously to the ceiling and stayed there. Absolute silence. 23 feathers, hovering 6 feet overhead, perfectly still. Flitwick made a sound that was not quite a word. 3 students turned to stare. Hermione turned very slowly, eyes wide, notebook already in hand. Harry looked at his hands. The warmth was fading back to ambient, the way sound fades after a bell stops. He looked up at the feathers. Sorry, he said. Flitwick recovered faster than most professors would have. He was a very old wizard and had seen a great many things, and he had the advantage of having felt the Bond announcement affect the castle in a way that put everything in context. "Remarkable," he said softly, peering up at the ceiling with his head tilted at an extreme angle. "Would you like them down again, Harry?" Harry looked at his hands again. "Yes," he said, and meant it, and they came down. All 23, settling like snow, one onto each desk, sorted, as if they knew where they belonged. "Right," said Flitwick, who spent the remainder of class visibly composing a letter to Dumbledore in his head. At lunch, Hermione said, "You didn't use a wand." "No," Harry said. "You didn't use an incantation." "No. You did it because you felt the bond." Harry considered this. "I did it because I felt you. Your satisfaction. When you got yours up." He turned his fork over. "And I sort of extended it?" Neville offered. "Without meaning to," Harry said. He looked at his hands, which looked entirely normal, which seemed like they should look different somehow given what they apparently did. "Ravenclaw said the seat of the mark is the hands." "In the fresco," Hermione said. Luna confirmed it. He set down his fork. "I think the magic is, I don't know. Responsive? To the bond? When one of you feels something strongly, I can feel it, and if I'm not careful about keeping it in, it spills," Hermione said. She was writing. "That's extraordinary. And dangerous. And extraordinary." "You said extraordinary twice," Neville observed. "It merited it twice," Hermione said, without looking up. The thing about Hogwarts that Harry had not expected, that no one had told him, because there was no chapter in Hogwarts, a history on the lived experience of walking through an ancient building while carrying something that the building itself remembered, was that the castle talked to him. Not in words. But in the way spaces changed. Corridors that should have been straightforward offered shortcuts that weren't on any map. Tapestries that had faced walls for centuries turned themselves slightly, offering the edge of things depicted on their reverse sides. Doors that were apparently not doors became relevant when he stood near them with a particular quality of attention. On Thursday evening, following a feeling that had been building since his conversation with Dumbledore, Harry followed a staircase he'd never taken before to a corridor on the 4th floor he hadn't known existed, which was remarkable because he'd been systematically exploring the castle at night and thought he'd covered this floor entirely. The corridor was short, and at its end was not a door but a section of wall where the stone had a different quality, older, more fundamental, the same old in a different way that he'd felt in the castle's bones when he'd pressed his hand to the fresco. He put his palm flat against it. The castle breathed. The stone didn't open so much as remember that it could open, the way a memory surfaces when you touch the right thing. It revealed not a room but an alcove, and in the alcove was a single object, a mirror-like surface in a simple stone frame, except it wasn't reflecting him. It was showing something else entirely, a web of light, silver threads converging at a central point, and the central point was here, in this castle, and it was pulsing in time with Harry's heartbeat in a way that was slightly overwhelming. "I thought you'd find it before I could show you." He didn't startle. Luna had a way of appearing that his nervous system had apparently already adjusted to. Her thread always preceded her, warm and silver and calm. She came to stand beside him and looked at the mirror thing with affectionate familiarity. "What is this?" Harry said. "The founders built it when Aldrich was here," Luna said. "To help him see the bond clearly. So he could learn the shape of it." She nodded at the web of light, the 7 threads converging. "Each thread has a quality. You can feel them, yes? But seeing them is different." Harry looked at the web. He could see it now, all 7, count them, 1, 2, the close harmonics of the twins wrapped in each other, 3, 4, steady and warm, 5 and 6 for the distant ones, pulling differently, one smooth and one with an edge like a plucked violin string, the one with the edge, Harry said. "Across the channel." "Fleur," Luna said, as if she'd known the name for some time. She's fighting the bond. She knows what it is, she's educated, her family is old blood, they know old magic, and she's decided it's inconvenient. Is it? Desperately, Luna said, with gentle amusement. She's in the middle of her school year and she's suddenly pulling toward England, which is, well, inconvenient is accurate. She tilted her head. She'll stop fighting it soon. Not because she'll give up. Because she'll decide to come on her own terms rather than be pulled. She's that kind of person. And the seventh? Harry said, looking at the remaining thread. The one that felt close now. Closer every day. Luna was quiet. Luna. That one, she said carefully, is complicated. She's not a student. She's someone who's been watching this school from a distance, and the bond found her, and she does not want to be found, and she's fighting it much harder than Fleur. She paused. She'll lose that fight too. But it'll take longer. Who is she? You'll know when you see her, Luna said, which was not an answer and was entirely Luna. The important thing is that all 7 are real, and all 7 are coming, and when they're all here, the bond is fully established, Harry said, remembering Ravenclaw's words from the book. By the time the bond was fully established. And whatever ceiling was on your power, Luna said, stops being relevant. Harry looked at his reflection in the mirror, or what should have been his reflection, which was instead the web of light showing the 7 threads, warm and present and pulling gently outward in all directions. He looked at his hands. The thing in the northwest tower, he said. When the bond is complete, will I be able to? Yes, Luna said simply. You don't know what I was going to ask. You were going to ask if you'd be able to deal with it properly, she said. And the answer is yes. She looked at him sidelong. But you don't need to wait for it to be complete. You're all ready, she made a gesture that encompassed him in a general sort of way. You. Harry looked at the web of light for another long moment. Then he put his hand flat against the mirror frame, gently, and said to the old magic in it, I see you. I know the shape of it. Thank you. The web pulsed once, warm and deep as a heartbeat, and he felt all 7 threads respond, even the distant ones, even the ones being fought, a single moment of simultaneous recognition that moved through the bond like a wave through water. Neville, 2 floors below, dropped his book and pressed his hand to his chest and smiled without knowing why. Hermione, in the library, looked up from her text and felt something settle in her, some anxious monitoring she'd been doing since the sorting, finally deciding it didn't need to be as active. Fred, in the common room, looked at George. George looked at Fred. They both grinned. Cedric, walking the 5th floor corridor on prefect rounds, stopped and let himself feel the drumbeat for a moment, just a moment, before straightening his robes and continuing his patrol with slightly better posture than before. And far across the channel, in the grounds of Beauxbatons, Fleur Delacour was in the middle of writing a strongly worded letter to herself about why she was absolutely not going to let this English bond dictate her schedule, when the pulse hit her like a bell struck close to her ear, clear and clean and undeniable, and she stopped writing mid-sentence because her hand had gone still and her chest was doing something that the letter had no useful response to. She sat with it for 30 seconds. Then she folded the letter, set it aside, and began composing a different letter, this one to Madame Maxime, requesting permission for an independent study visit to Hogwarts at the earliest possible opportunity, citing cultural exchange and educational enrichment as her rationale, both of which were true enough. Friday brought the first proper confrontation with the thing Harry had been filing under Northwest Tower, deal with later. It happened in the corridor outside the 3rd floor defense classroom. Quirrell, Professor Quirrell, with his stutter and his garlic and his purple turban wrapped with the careful overcrowding of someone concealing something, was coming down the corridor as Harry came up it, and they reached the same narrow junction at the same moment, and Harry felt it immediately. The wrongness. Up close it was worse than it was from a distance. It was like standing next to a fire that was giving off cold instead of heat, all the sensory indicators of warmth with the actual thermal quality inverted. Quirrell smelled like garlic, and underneath the garlic like something else, something Harry's hindbrain registered without being able to name. He stopped walking and stood in the corridor and looked at Quirrell directly, without moving out of the junction, because the part of him that had lived for a decade being told to make himself small and invisible had apparently retired. Quirrell stopped too. His eyes flickered, something behind them, something that looked out from behind the stutter and the academic fumbling the way a puppeteer watches through the puppet's eyes. "P.P. Potter," Quirrell said. "Gee, good morning." "Good morning," Harry said pleasantly. He kept his hands loose at his sides and his gaze level, and the part of him that was ancient magic said, "I see you. Both of you. The one wearing the body and the one inside it." Something moved in Quirrell's eyes. The thing behind the stutter looked at Harry, really looked, and for a single, unguarded moment, it recognized him right back. Not with fear. With sharp, sudden, recalibrating interest. The way a chess player looks when the piece they've been discounting turns out to have options they hadn't mapped. "Have a good D-Day, Potter," Quirrell said. "You too," Harry said, and stepped aside to let him pass, which was the polite thing to do and also meant Quirrell had to walk past him, which meant Harry could watch the way the turban sat wrong, too full, too structured, as if it contained something other than just cloth and head underneath. He stood in the corridor after Quirrell had turned the corner and let the cold wash out of his awareness. His hands were warm. Both of them, warm with the slow pulse of the bond. He thought about what Dumbledore had said. "Something I am monitoring." He thought about what Ravenclaw had written. "The danger is not the power itself but the attention of those who would rather see such a thing controlled than free." He thought about the web of threads, and the seventh one still at a distance, and all the things that were still becoming. Then he went to defense class, sat in the front row, which he suspected Quirrell didn't like, and paid very close attention. It was Neville who found the newspaper article. He came running, not panicking, not breathless, just moving with the specific urgent energy of someone who had found something and needed the right people to see it, into the library at 6 Saturday evening, where Harry and Hermione and Luna were working through Hermione's notes from the restricted section, and dropped a copy of the Daily Prophet on the table. The headline read, "Gringotts break-in, nothing taken, vault left empty, ministry investigating." It was dated July 31st. The same day as Harry's birthday. The same day Hagrid had taken him to Gringotts. Hermione looked at the article. Then she looked at Harry. "Vault 713, she said. "Hagrid collected something from Vault 713. "The day you were there. I noticed him come back with a package," Harry said. "I didn't ask about it." He picked up the paper and looked at the article again. Attempted break-in believed to be the work of a dark organization, though ministry sources confirm no objects were removed. Whatever it was, it's here. In the castle. "The third floor," Neville said, and they all looked at him. He shrugged slightly. "I noticed because of Fluffy." 3 beats of silence. "Fluffy," Hermione said. "The three-headed dog. On the third-floor corridor. I got lost the first week, wrong staircase, I went through the wrong door and there was a..." Neville paused. "A very large dog. 3 heads. Standing on a trapdoor." "A trapdoor," Harry said. "Beneath it, yes." Luna was looking at her copy of the Quibbler, which she'd been reading upside down throughout this conversation. "The Northwest Tower," she said, without looking up. They all looked at her. "The thing in the Northwest Tower is interested in the trapdoor," she said, turning a page. "It has been since before the school year began. That's why it's here." She finally looked up. "Whatever is under that trapdoor is what Quirrell, and whoever is wearing Quirrell, came to Hogwarts to get." Harry looked at the newspaper. The date. His birthday. Hagrid collecting something in a package. The cold directional pull of whatever lived inside the turban, and the trapdoor, and the three-headed dog above it. He looked at his hands. They were warm. They were always warm now. "Okay," he said. "So whatever was taken from Gringotts is hidden under that trapdoor, and whatever is sharing Quirrell's body wants it." He set the paper down. "We need to know what it is." "I might already know," Hermione said, and everyone looked at her. She had the expression of someone who'd had a piece of information floating in their library for 2 days and had just found the context to file it correctly. She reached into her bag and pulled out Hogwarts, a history, opened to a marked page, and turned it to face them. The page described, in 2 careful paragraphs, a collaboration between Hogwarts and Gringotts in the 10th century for the purpose of housing a particular class of objects too dangerous for either institution to secure alone. The combined protections, the book noted, were considered unbreachable by any magic known to the current era. The class of objects was not named. But in the margin, in old ink, faded to brown, in a hand that Harry recognized from the restricted section as Ravenclaw's own, someone had written 2 words. "The Stone." Luna looked at it. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said. "Nicholas Flamel," Hermione said immediately, because of course she'd already made this leap. "He created it." He must be centuries old," Harry said, remembering reading something about Flamel in a card that came with a chocolate frog on the train. He looked at the margin annotation again. At Ravenclaw's handwriting. At the warmth in his hands. He thought, this is what the thing in the northwest tower is here for. It has been here all year, waiting for the right moment, wearing a professor's face and smelling like garlic and cold. He thought, Dumbledore is managing this. Is watching it. But managing and watching are not the same as stopping. He thought about a corridor junction and something looking at him through Quirrell's eyes with the recalibrating attention of a chess player finding unexpected options. "We need to be ready," he said. "For what?" Neville said. Harry looked at the trapdoor in his mind, and the thing above it wearing a body like a garment, and the 7 threads running through his hands like silver water. He looked at all of them, Hermione with her notebook, Neville with his toad sitting patiently on the table, Luna with her upside-down magazine, and Fred and George who appeared in the doorway at this exact moment because they had an inexplicable talent for arriving precisely when things became relevant. "For when waiting stops being a viable strategy," Harry said. "And I don't think it stays viable for long." Fred leaned against the doorframe and looked at the newspaper headline. "Gringotts," he said. "Trapdoor. Something in the turban." He looked at George. "Classic. Textbook, really," George agreed. "Are we doing the thing where we pretend we're not going to get involved?" Fred said. "Or are we skipping to the part where we're already involved?" Harry looked at him. "Already involved," he said. Fred brightened. "Excellent. Much better pacing." That night, Harry lay in the dark of the dormitory with all 7 threads humming in his chest, 6 nearby, 1 impossibly far, 1 approaching. He thought about Dumbledore's face when he'd said "I hope not." He thought about Ravenclaw's margin annotation in a book that was hundreds of years old, and the fresco, and the mirror that showed the web of light, and Quirrell's eyes with something else looking out of them. He thought about the stone, and what someone would do with a stone that made you immortal, and what someone who was already not quite dead would do with it if they could reach it. He pressed his hands flat against his mattress in the dark, just to feel the warmth in them. The castle breathed around him, slow and ancient and aware, and something in its bones said, "Not yet." But soon. Soon, Harry agreed. He slept. Chapter 4, Crossing Lines. The letter from Beauxbatons arrived on a Tuesday, which was an unremarkable day to change the shape of things, but the universe rarely consulted schedules. Harry was at breakfast when the owl landed, not a Hogwarts owl, something sleeker and southern-looking, pale feathers and an air of professional indifference, and dropped an envelope directly in front of him with the precision of a bird that had been given very specific coordinates and no patience for approximation. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with pale blue wax, and it smelled faintly of something he couldn't identify. Not perfume, exactly. More like warm light, if warm light had a scent. He opened it. The handwriting inside was decisive and slightly angular, the kind of handwriting that didn't leave room for misinterpretation. Monsieur Potter, I am aware of what exists between us, and I want to be clear that my arrival at your school is a decision I have made independently, on my own timeline, for my own reasons. It is not capitulation to the bond. I simply find that studying it from a distance is becoming intellectually inefficient. I will arrive Thursday. F. Delacour. Harry read it twice. Then he turned it over, found nothing on the back, and set it down. Who's it from? Neville asked. Fleur, Harry said. Luna looked up from her porridge. Thursday, she said, as if confirming something she already knew. That's good timing, actually. Is it? Hermione said, taking the letter and reading it with the focused speed of someone processing both content and subtext simultaneously. Her eyebrows moved through several positions. She sounds proud, Harry said. I was going to say guarded, Hermione said. Both, Luna said placidly. Fred leaned across the table and read the letter upside down. She sounds like someone who wants you to know she's not impressed before she arrives, he said, which is classic behavior for someone who's already impressed and doesn't want to admit it. You got all that from 4 sentences? Neville said. We are students of human nature, George said from Fred's left, where he'd materialized at some point during this conversation. It's our primary subject. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Thursday. 2 days. The thread that had been pulling across the channel with that violin string edge, already it felt slightly different, like the string being tuned from a distance. Moving toward him, purposeful and controlled, fighting its own pull all the way to the boat or train or however she was getting here and then catching that boat or train anyway because she was exactly the kind of person the letter said she was. He found he was looking forward to meeting her. Wednesday brought a development nobody had planned for, which was a letter to the school from the Ministry of Magic. They knew about it because McGonagall called the Gryffindor first-years to her office after dinner with the specific gravity of a professor delivering news she'd rather not be delivering, and because her expression throughout was the one she reserved for situations she considered inadequate, which covered a range from poorly executed transfigurations to what Harry was coming to understand was a significant fraction of ministry policy. The ministry, she said, once they were all seated and Neville had found a chair that wasn't wobbling, has requested, and the headmaster has agreed, with conditions, that a representative be permitted to visit the school next week to assess the, she paused. The situation. The situation, Hermione said carefully. The mark, McGonagall said, because she was not the kind of woman who used euphemisms when directness was available. Specifically, they want to observe and document Harry's bond and its manifestations. This is standard procedure under the Magical Anomalies Monitoring Act of 1947, which is broad enough to cover events like this. Harry looked at her. And you're telling us separately because? McGonagall met his eyes directly. Because you should know that the representative they're sending is Lucius Malfoy. She said the name with the particular vocal precision of someone placing a sharp object on a table so everyone can see what it is. He currently chairs the Committee for Magical Heritage and Oversight. He requested the assignment personally. Fred's expression went flat. George's followed a half-second later, like an echo. Malfoy requested it, Fred said. Specifically, George confirmed, though he'd just heard it at the same time as everyone else. Why? Harry said. McGonagall's expression did something layered. Officially, to ensure the ministry's records are accurate and the school is providing appropriate support. She let the pause after that sentence do its own work. The conditions Dumbledore has imposed include that no direct examination of Harry takes place without his consent, and that all observations occur in communal settings. She looked at Harry. You are not obligated to speak with Mr. Malfoy. You are not obligated to perform. You are not obligated to make this easy for anyone. But I should be aware he's coming, Harry said. I believe in informed students, she said crisply, which was about as personal as McGonagall got. She stood. That will be all. Mr. Potter, a word. They waited while the others filed out, and then it was just the two of them and the fireplace and the tartan tin of biscuits on her desk that Harry suspected she offered to students she actually liked. Lucius Malfoy, she said, is an intelligent man. He will not do anything overtly threatening. He will be charming and interested and entirely professional. She met Harry's eyes. He will also be looking for something he can use. Whether to control the bond, or to claim a stake in it on behalf of the ministry, or to understand it well enough to undermine it. She paused. I am telling you this because I think you are better served by accurate information than by false reassurance. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it simply. She pushed the biscuit tin toward him. Don't let them make you small, Potter, she said, and it was the second time he'd heard something like that in a week, and both times it had come from someone who usually expressed care through rigor rather than warmth, which told him something about what his presence here was doing to people who'd spent years watching children told to be less than they were. He took a biscuit. It was shortbread. It was excellent. Fleur Delacour arrived on Thursday morning, and she arrived the way the letter had prepared him for, on her own terms, ahead of schedule, and with the particular self-possession of someone who had decided exactly how this was going to go before they got off the train. She appeared at the entrance to the Great Hall at 8:45, which was breakfast, which was a communal enough setting that the whole school could observe her arrival and was very obviously doing so. She was tall for 14, she'd be 15 in December, though Harry didn't know this yet, with silver blonde hair and the kind of bearing that wasn't arrogance exactly but was the close cousin of it, the bearing of someone who'd been looked at so frequently they'd made peace with it by simply refusing to be diminished by it. She wore Beauxbatons robes, pale blue, because she hadn't enrolled, she was visiting, and she was making no pretense of being otherwise. She stood in the doorway and looked at the hall with the calm, calibrating gaze of someone taking stock of a room, and then she looked, directly, without hesitation, across 800 students and 4 long tables, at Harry. And stopped. Harry looked back. The thread between them, the violin string thread, pulled taut and then released, like a breath taken and let go. Not pain. Recognition. The kind that happens when something you've been half-hearing for a long time finally resolves into a clear note. Fleur walked across the hall. She did not hurry. She was not going to hurry, that much was clear from her posture, but she didn't slow either, and the students she passed had the good instinct to get out of her way without being asked. She stopped at the Gryffindor table across from Harry and looked at him for a moment with silver-gray eyes that were doing something complicated, assessment, adjustment, and underneath both of those things, something that wasn't going to be named yet but was present. Harry Potter, she said. Her accent was French and her English was perfect, and she said his name like she was testing whether it was the right one. Fleur Delacour, he said. Something about hearing her name from him made her expression shift just slightly. She sat down across from him without being invited, which was exactly right. She looked at the others, Hermione and Neville and Luna and Fred and George, with the quick, thorough attention of someone deciding whether to trust each person individually rather than as a group. She looked at Luna the longest. You knew I was coming, Fleur said to her. Since August, Luna agreed pleasantly, and offered her the butter. Fleur looked at the butter. Then she took it. It was, Harry thought, the moment she decided these people were not going to be a problem. The bond, she said to Harry, setting the butter down. I have read everything available about the Mark of the Seven. My family has a library of old magic texts, and my grandmother, she paused, making a decision about how much to say. My grandmother recognized what I was feeling immediately. She folded her hands on the table. I am not here because I couldn't resist. I am here because I chose to come and face it directly rather than spend my school year feeling. She stopped. Incomplete? Harry offered. Her expression moved through something quick and honest and then settled. Distracted, she said, which was her version of the same thing. I do not like being distracted. How long are you here for? Hermione asked, notebook already open. Madame Maxime has approved 3 weeks, Fleur said. Independent study credit. She glanced at Harry. The bond, you feel all 7? Even me, at distance? Yes, Harry said. 2 of you were far. You and 1 other. You felt like a violin string someone was pulling at. Fleur's chin lifted slightly. That was me fighting it, she said, without apology. I know, Harry said. I understand why. And he did, because he'd thought about it since the letter came, about what it would mean to suddenly feel this pull towards someone you'd never met, in a country you weren't in, during a school year with its own demands and its own structures. He understood fighting things you couldn't immediately categorize. Fleur looked at him. Her expression did something it hadn't done since she arrived. It softened, just at the edges, just enough to be visible. You are not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She considered this honestly. Someone who found all this flattering, she said. Someone who assumed the bond meant possession. It doesn't, Harry said. No, she said. I can feel that it doesn't. She picked up a piece of toast, which was the most functional thing she'd done since sitting down, and there was something in the ordinariness of it, Fleur Delacour, beaux batons, half villa, silver hair and bearing, eating Hogwarts toast, that made the thread between them hum with something that felt less like pull and more like warmth. Real warmth, the kind you choose. Hermione wrote something in her notebook. Luna smiled at her porridge. Thursday became Friday became Saturday, and Fleur wove herself into the shape of them with less friction than Harry had expected and more grace than she would have admitted to. She and Hermione established a productive working relationship within 24 hours, which consisted primarily of trading information at high speed and occasionally disagreeing with a velocity that generated heat but not damage. Fleur and Luna got along the way that people who understand the same unusual language sometimes get along, quietly, without needing to explain much. With Harry, she was direct. She said what she meant, asked what she wanted to know, and didn't perform anything. He appreciated it. He was also aware, in a background way that he wasn't doing much with yet, that the thread between them had warmth in it that was its own category. He had 7 threads. 6 of them were present now, in this castle. Each one felt different and right in its own specific way, and he wasn't ranking them or sorting them because that felt like the wrong approach to something this fundamental. He was just learning the shape of each one. Paying attention. Cedric had introduced himself properly to Fleur at dinner Friday, which had been interesting to watch, 2 people who were both naturally composed meeting each other's composure and deciding to be amused by it rather than compete with it. They'd had a 15-minute conversation about herbology that made no reference to the bond at all, and then Fleur had said, very directly, you are a steadying influence on him, and Cedric had said, he's a steadying influence on himself, I just add to it, and Fleur had nodded as if he'd confirmed something she'd assessed independently. Harry had been 3 feet away, ostensibly reading, and hadn't commented. Lucius Malfoy arrived Monday morning. He was announced by Dumbledore at breakfast, a brief and information-dense introduction that said everything officially required and nothing personally illuminating. Malfoy himself appeared at the staff table. He was not, pointedly, at the head table, which was Dumbledore's first condition and which Malfoy had accepted with the grace of a man who had already identified 7 other routes to the same destination. Harry looked at him from the Gryffindor table and felt, not threat, exactly. Something that wanted to be threat but had dressed as something else. Malfoy was tall, patrician, pale-haired in a way that was different from Fleur's silver and reminded Harry instead of cold stone. He wore robes that were expensive without being flashy, which was its own kind of display. He surveyed the hall with the proprietary ease of a man who was used to being the most politically significant person in any room and had been for long enough that he'd stopped noticing it. Then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back. He didn't look away first, because he never looked away first, and because there was something in Malfoy's initial gaze that was testing exactly that, finding the shape of what he was dealing with. Whatever Malfoy found, it made his expression recalibrate subtly, the way the thing in Quirrell's eyes had recalibrated in the corridor junction. Harry watched the man decide to revise his approach mid-look, which was interesting information. The morning proceeded. Malfoy observed 2 classes, took notes in a slim leather-bound journal, and was present in corridors in the way of someone allowing people to become used to being watched. He spoke to several students, his son Draco with the easy familiarity of long practice, a handful of others with the particular warmth of someone doing fieldwork who knows how to put subjects at ease. He didn't approach Harry. Harry noticed. The approach came after dinner, in the entrance hall, and it was stage-managed with the kind of casual precision that meant it had been planned since Monday morning. Malfoy happened to be coming down the stairs as Harry was crossing the entrance hall with Fleur and Cedric, which meant Harry was flanked rather than alone, which Malfoy had also almost certainly factored in. "Harry," he said, descending the stairs with a smile that was warm and completely professional. "I've been hoping for a moment." Harry stopped. He didn't take a step back. He stood in the entrance hall and looked at Lucius Malfoy and waited. "My name is Lucius Malfoy," Malfoy said, extending a hand. "I'm here in a purely supportive capacity, you understand. The Ministry wants to ensure that you're being given everything you need to understand and navigate this remarkable situation." Harry shook his hand, because refusing would be making a point before the point was worth making. "I've got everything I need," he said pleasantly. "I'm very glad to hear it." Malfoy's gaze flicked, briefly, assessingly, to Fleur. To Cedric. A fraction of a second each. "And your bond-bearers are settling in well?" "All, how many is it now?" "6 of the 7, I understand." "That's right," Harry said. "And the 7th?" "In progress," Harry said. "Quite." Malfoy clasped his hands lightly. "The Ministry is, naturally, keenly interested in the well-being of everyone involved. A bond of this nature, it's extraordinary. Historical. The documentation alone could fill volumes. It would be enormously valuable, from a heritage and educational standpoint, to have access to some formal record of the bond's development. How it functions. How it manifests." His gaze settled on Harry with the pleasantly interested expression of someone who was not remotely asking what they appeared to be asking. "I wonder if you'd be open to a more formal arrangement, a documentation program, overseen by the Ministry, to ensure this remarkable phenomenon is properly studied and preserved." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "No." Malfoy's expression didn't falter. He had very good control over his expression. "I think if you understood the full scope of what, I understand the full scope," Harry said. "The mark of the 7 is ancient magic. It's not Ministry jurisdiction. It's not a heritage artifact. It's a living bond between people, and the Ministry documenting it doesn't preserve it, it just means the Ministry has records of it." He kept his voice easy and conversational because he wasn't angry, he was clear. "I'm not interested in being studied. Or documented. Or managed. A beat." In that beat, Fleur shifted fractionally to Harry's left, not dramatically, just present, and Cedric, to his right, settled into the particular stillness of someone who was entirely comfortable with where they were standing and had no intention of moving. Malfoy looked at the 3 of them. Something moved behind his composed expression, not anger, something more interesting. A reassessment. "You're 11 years old," he said, and it was said pleasantly, but the subtext was doing work. "I know," Harry said. "It's been an eventful few months." He met Malfoy's gaze with the same calm directness he'd applied to everything since he arrived. "I appreciate you explaining the Ministry's interest. I'll let you know if that changes." A 3-second silence, which was long enough to mean something. Malfoy smiled. It was an impressive smile, practiced and real in equal measure, and it contained no concession but acknowledged the exchange. "Of course," he said. "My door is open." He glanced at Fleur with the specific quality of attention that a man who understood political leverage used when cataloguing assets. "Mademoiselle Delacour, your family is well, I hope?" "Perfectly well," Fleur said, in a tone that was impeccably polite and contained as much warmth as a marble floor. "Thank you." Malfoy inclined his head and continued through the entrance hall toward the great doors, unhurried, as if the conversation had gone entirely as planned. Which, Harry thought, it possibly had, because what Malfoy had come to find out wasn't whether Harry would agree to a documentation program, it was what Harry would do when asked. And now he knew. Cedric watched him go. "He's going to try something else," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Something through channels we can't say no to as easily." "Probably." Harry started walking toward the stairs. "We've got a few days. Let's figure out what he has access to before he figures out what we won't let him access." "That's," Fleur said, falling into step, "a remarkably strategic approach for someone who just told a ministry official no to his face and looked entirely unruffled about it." "I spent years in a house where saying the wrong thing to the wrong person meant no dinner," Harry said simply. "Reading what someone actually wants versus what they're saying is something I learned early." Fleur was quiet for a moment. Then she said, more quietly than her usual register, "Me also." "Different situation." "But, yes. Also me." Harry nodded. He didn't press. He understood the shape of that kind of admission, how it came out sideways, how you offered it and needed it received gently or not at all. "Then we're both well equipped," he said, and that was the end of it, and it was enough. The next morning, Fred and George appeared at breakfast with the expressions of men who had spent the night doing research and wanted partial credit for the results. "Lucius Malfoy," Fred said, sitting down and pouring himself pumpkin juice, "holds 3 ministry committee seats, has donated to the Hogwarts Board of Governors for 11 years running, and is currently the primary financial backer of a proposed amendment to the Educational Oversight Act that would give the ministry formal inspection rights over, quote, anomalous magical phenomena occurring within the grounds of registered educational institutions." Harry looked up from his eggs. "When was the amendment proposed?" "September 2nd, George said. "The day after the sorting." Harry turned this over. "He moved fast," he said. "He moved prepared," Fred corrected. "He had this drafted already. He just needed a triggering event to justify it." He leaned across the table. "The amendment goes to committee in 3 weeks. Hermione had been listening and was already writing. If it passes, the ministry could send inspectors. Formally. With ministry-level legal authority to observe, document, and intervene," she read something from her notes, "in educational circumstances they determine to be raising welfare or safety concerns. Which they could determine the bond is," Neville said, quietly. "Safety or welfare concerns," Cedric said from the end of the table. He'd been there for 10 minutes, which Harry had known from the thread, though he hadn't come over yet, apparently waiting to see what the morning brought. "That's broad enough to cover basically anything they decide they don't like." "Yes," Harry said. "So what do we do?" Neville asked. Harry thought about it. He thought about Dumbledore's conditions on Malfoy's visit. He thought about the fact that Dumbledore had known this was coming, had known Malfoy would come, had prepared for it, and still hadn't found a way to stop the amendment from being drafted. He thought about the fresco, and Ravenclaw's journals, and the danger is not the power itself but the attention of those who would rather see such a thing controlled than free. He thought about the warmth in his hands. About what they could do. "We make the bond public," he said. Everyone looked at him. "Not to give the ministry access," he said. "The opposite. We make it known. Properly known. On our terms, before they can put their framing on it. The story right now is mysterious anomaly the ministry needs to oversee. If we change the story to historical phenomenon that's been studied for 1,000 years and is functioning exactly as documented and needs no oversight because it's not a danger to anyone, we take the thing Malfoy wants to use away from him. We'd need a platform, Hermione said. She looked at him carefully. And evidence. The restricted section texts. Ravenclaw's journals. Which Dumbledore could get us access to, Cedric said, if we framed the request correctly. As educational access rather than investigative access, Fleur said, following the logic. Standard academic use. He couldn't refuse that publicly. He might not want to refuse it privately either, Harry said. I think Dumbledore is worried about the Ministry getting hold of this as much as we are. He's just managing it from a different angle. He looked around at all of them. He's been trying to protect things by keeping them small and quiet. I think we try something different. Making them big and loud, Fred said, visibly delighted. Making them accurate, Harry said. Which just happens to be the opposite of what Malfoy wants. Dumbledore agreed to the academic access request that evening, over tea in his office, and Harry watched the headmaster process what was being proposed with the look of a man who had been playing a careful game for decades and had just been handed a move he hadn't considered. The journals would need to be copied, Dumbledore said. Hermione can do that in a day, Harry said. The Ministry will see a publication as a challenge. The Ministry is already treating this as a challenge, Harry said. Malfoy drafted that amendment the day after the sorting. He was ready for this. We're just responding. He met Dumbledore's eyes. You've been trying to contain the attention by being quiet. But quiet means their version of it gets told. I'd rather we tell ours. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Fawkes watched them both with his steady, dark, ancient gaze. You sound, Dumbledore said finally, remarkably certain for someone in his first year of magical education. I've been reading Ravenclaw's actual journals, Harry said. Which are extraordinary. She was brilliant. And she wrote specifically about what happens to the mark-bearer when institutional forces try to manage the bond instead of respecting it. He paused. It doesn't go well for the institution. Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon glasses. Something in his expression shifted, not defeat, not concession, but a kind of genuine recognition, the look of a man who has spent a long time holding something carefully and is being shown a way to put it down. The full academic access, he said, will be granted. Thank you, Harry said. Harry. Dumbledore stopped him at the door for the second time. You are aware that Mr. Malfoy will not respond to being outmaneuvered quietly. I know, Harry said. But he'll have to come at us directly if we take his institutional angle away. And direct is better than sideways. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. I'd rather someone come at me honestly than spend the year watching them not quite doing it. He went down the revolving stairs and into the corridor where Fleur was waiting, because she'd started doing that, appearing in corridors near where he was with something to do while she waited, always managing to be busy enough that it wasn't waiting, just proximity, and he told her what Dumbledore had agreed to, and her expression did the thing it sometimes did where it was entirely unreadable for a moment and then, quietly, became something real. Good, she said simply. And fell into step beside him. They were halfway down the corridor when Harry felt something shift in the threads, a small seismic thing, subtle and certain. He stopped walking. The seventh thread. It had been growing closer for days, a presence moving at the edge of his awareness like a ship approaching a harbor in fog. But now it was close. Tonight's close. In Scotland close. He stood in the corridor with Fleur at his side and his hands warm and all the threads humming, and felt the seventh one resolve from a distant pull into something proximate and present and afraid. Not of him. Afraid in general. In the way of someone who had been running from something specific for a long time and had just arrived somewhere that the thing she was running from could reach her. She's here, Harry said. Fleur looked at him. Now? Tonight, he said. The castle breathed. He stood still and let the seventh thread know, not in words, not in anything that could be articulated, just in the way the bond moved when he stopped resisting it, that wherever she was, whatever she was running from, she was not alone in it. The thread trembled. Steadied. And somewhere in Scotland, close enough to matter, a woman who had been running for a long time felt something she had not felt in years, the specific warmth of something saying "I see you," with no agenda attached to the seeing. She sat down wherever she was and breathed. And Harry turned to Fleur and said, "We should probably tell the others." Chapter 5, What the Founders Built. She arrived at the gates at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, which was not visiting hours, which was not a scheduled arrival, which was not anything the castle's administrative infrastructure had been consulted about. The gate opened for her anyway, because the castle had been waiting for her since September and had no interest in the paperwork. Harry knew the moment she crossed the threshold. The seventh thread went from proximate and approaching to here, present and real and close enough that the bond snapped into something complete, not finished, not fully established yet, but whole in a way the six-thread version hadn't been. Like a chord with a missing note suddenly played correctly. He sat up in bed at 10:30 with his heart doing something that wasn't alarm and wasn't quite recognition and was something in between, and he reached for the feeling the way you'd reach for a lamp in the dark. She felt it. He could tell because the thread went briefly rigid, like the moment before someone decides whether to run, and then, slowly, deliberately, softened. He got dressed. Neville was already awake when Harry came through the dormitory. He was sitting on the edge of his bed with his hands folded and his expression carrying the specific quality of someone who had felt something shift and was waiting to understand what. "The seventh," Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. Neville stood up without asking for further explanation and started pulling on his robes, because 3 months of the bond had calibrated him to a particular frequency of Harry's certainty, and that frequency meant this matters and we go now. The castle let them out of Gryffindor Tower without the portrait arguing, which was unusual enough that Harry filed it under the building is cooperating tonight. The corridors were quiet in the deep night way of an old building, not empty, because Hogwarts was never quite empty. There were always paintings shifting and staircases deciding to be somewhere else and things that moved at the edges of torchlight, but quiet in the sense that what was awake at this hour had no interest in stopping them. Hermione caught up with them on the second-floor landing, which meant either the bond had woken her too or she'd never gone to sleep, both of which were plausible. She had her wand and her notebook and she was still buttoning her robe with one hand while she walked, which was efficient. "Where is she?" Hermione said. "Entrance hall, I think," Harry said. "Moving slowly. She's not sure which direction to go." "How do you know she's a she?" Neville asked. "I don't know. I just know," Harry said, which was not an explanation but was accurate, and Neville accepted it with the equanimity he'd been applying to inexplicable bond-related phenomena since September. Luna appeared on the first-floor landing from a direction that shouldn't have produced Luna at this hour, wearing her robes over what appeared to be pajamas printed with narwhals, and fell into step with them with the unhurried certainty of someone arriving exactly on time. "She'll be frightened," Luna said quietly. "Of the bond?" Hermione asked. "Of being found," Luna said. "There's a difference." They came down the main staircase and into the entrance hall, and Harry stopped at the bottom step because the seventh thread was pulling north-northwest, toward the main doors, which were closed but not locked. The castle had not locked them tonight, and standing against the far wall, half in shadow, was a woman. She was young, mid-20s, Harry estimated, which meant she was the oldest of the 7 by some years, with dark red hair cut close at the nape and loose at the crown, and robes that were not school robes and not ministry robes and not quite either, the kind of robes that said "I travel alone and I've been doing it long enough not to look like I'm traveling." She had her arms crossed and she was looking at Harry with the specific expression of someone who has argued themselves into a corner and knows it but isn't ready to stop arguing. She was standing against the wall of Hogwarts and trying to look like she hadn't just had a crisis about it. Harry walked across the entrance hall and stopped when he was close enough to talk normally. She looked at him. He looked at her. The thread between them was warm and bright and absolutely certain, and he watched her feel it and watch herself feel it and find the feeling difficult to argue with. "I'm Harry," he said. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was low and a bit rough, like someone who'd been talking to themselves on a long journey. "Everyone knows who you are." "Then you've got an advantage," he said. "What's your name?" A pause. In the pause, he could feel her doing something, measuring, assessing, doing the particular calculation of someone who has been alone with their own judgment for a long time and is being asked to extend it to include other people. "Rowan," she said. "Rowan Ashwick. How far did you come?" Something crossed her expression, not quite the grief of it, but the adjacent thing, the acknowledgement of distance measured in more than miles. "Edinburgh," she said. "Originally. But I've been moving around. For about 2 years. Harry nodded. He didn't ask why. He let the silence be the kind that invited rather than demanded. Neville appeared at his shoulder, quiet as groundwater. "Hi," he said to Rowan, with the specific warmth that was purely Neville's, simple and genuine and asking nothing back. "I'm Neville. Are you hungry?" "Because I'm always hungry at this hour and there are almost definitely ways to get food." Rowan looked at Neville for a moment with an expression that did something complicated, like a wall discovering it was a door. "Yes," she said, after a beat. "Actually." They ended up in the kitchens, because Hogwarts had kitchens and Fred and George had, months ago, located both the entrance and the house elves' willingness to produce food at unreasonable hours without formal request. Fred and George themselves materialized 10 minutes in through means nobody inquired about, because Fred and George's nocturnal navigation of the castle was a force of nature rather than a skill. Rowan sat at the small table in the corner of the kitchen with her hands around a mug of tea and looked at the assembled group with an expression that had shifted from wary to something more analytical. She was cataloguing them, Harry thought. Not with hostility. With the focused attention of someone who had learned to read groups quickly and was currently finding the reading unexpected. "You're all," she started, then stopped. "Varied?" Hermione offered. "Young," Rowan said. "Most of you." "Harry's 11, Fred said helpfully. "We're 13. Hermione and Neville are also 11. Luna's 12. Cedric, who isn't here tonight but you'll meet him tomorrow, is 15. And Fleur is 14. And me," Rowan said. 24. Harry guessed, which was close enough that her expression confirmed it without her needing to say so. 23, she corrected. "The bond found you 2 years ago," Luna said. It wasn't a question. Rowan looked at Luna, and there was something in that look, the specific recognition of one unusual person encountering another. "September 2 years ago," she said. "I was in Edinburgh. I don't have a good word for it. Something pulled. Something I couldn't locate. And every time I tried to stay put it got worse." She looked at her tea. "So I started moving. And moving helped, except it didn't actually help, it just postponed. And eventually, she made a gesture that encompassed the kitchen, the castle, all of them. Here. You knew it was coming from Hogwarts?" Hermione said, notebook already in hand. "Or from Harry specifically?" "I knew it was coming from something I didn't understand and was absolutely not going to walk toward," Rowan said, with a dry honesty that was its own kind of humor. "Until about 3 weeks ago when," she stopped. She looked at Harry. He knew what she was describing. 3 weeks ago, in the corridor with the Founder's mirror. When he'd pressed his hand to the mirror frame and said, "I see you." The wave through water. "That was me," he said. "I know," she said. It felt like someone had finally turned a light on in a room I'd been navigating in the dark." She paused. "I didn't want to feel that. For the record." "I know," Harry said, and the lack of judgment in it made her look at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. What did you do? She asked. Before Hogwarts. Where did you come from? A cupboard under the stairs, Harry said. And before that, my parents. Lily and James Potter, she said. Yes. Rowan was quiet. She turned her mug in her hands. I knew your mother, she said, and the entire kitchen went still. Not well. I was at Hogwarts during her 7th year. She was remarkable. The ancient magic theory she was developing, the sacrifice magic, the love as a fundamental force, she stopped. I read about what happened. What it did. She looked at Harry with an expression that was direct and careful and carrying something she'd had years to settle but hadn't entirely set down. You have her hands, she said. Nobody said anything for a moment. Thank you, Harry said quietly. Rowan looked at her tea. I should have come sooner, she said. I knew what the bond was. My family, we study old magic. My grandmother documented 3 of the historical cases. I knew exactly what it meant when I felt it. And I ran anyway because I was in the middle of, she stopped. Decided how much. I was in the middle of something I needed to finish. Something the ministry was involved in. Something that made being findable a problem. What kind of something? Cedric's voice came from the doorway. He was there, still in his prefect robes, having apparently been awake and done the thread-tracking calculation himself. He looked at Rowan with his calm, level gaze. I'm Cedric. And I'm asking because if the ministry is looking for you, we've got a ministry official in the castle right now. Rowan's expression sharpened. Who? Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. 3 seconds of silence that were qualitatively different from the other silences of the evening. Rowan's expression went through something Harry couldn't fully read, not fear, something older than fear, the flat controlled alertness of someone who has been in genuine danger and knows what a specific name means. Of course it's Malfoy, she said. What did you find? Harry said. She looked at him. How did you know I found something? Because running is a response to finding things, he said. Not to looking. Rowan set down her mug and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at all of them, the kitchen full of people who were connected to her whether she'd chosen it or not, who had not asked her a single question with a wrong motive since she'd walked in the door. Malfoy's been funding research, she said. Old magic research. Dark object procurement. Not illegal, not technically, because he's careful. But connected to something that should be illegal, which is the systematic acquisition of Founder-era artifacts for private collection. She looked at Harry. Specifically objects connected to Hogwarts's original protective architecture. The stone isn't connected to Founder-era architecture, Hermione said immediately, following the thread of it. No, Rowan said. But there's something that is. She looked at the table. There's a chamber in this castle that Malfoy has known about for years, that the ministry doesn't officially know exists, that contains, Ravenclaw specifically designed it. A nexus point for the original protective magic of the school. The stuff the wards run on. The same architecture the bond is rooted in. The kitchen was very quiet. He wants the castle's power source, Harry said. He wants to understand it well enough to replicate it, Rowan said. Privately. A family-owned magical fortress with Hogwarts-level protections and nobody else's oversight. She looked at Harry. He doesn't know where the chamber is. I found the documentation 2 years ago in a private Malfoy archive that she paused. Accessed. Broke into, George said appreciatively. Accessed, Rowan said firmly, and what I found was enough to know that if Malfoy ever found his way to it, the magical infrastructure of this school, the wards, the protections, the bond architecture itself, could be reverse-engineered by someone with sufficient dark magic knowledge. She met Harry's eyes. Someone like whoever has been occupying Quirrell's body all year. The silence this time lasted longer. The stone and the chamber are separate, Harry said, thinking it through aloud. Quirrell wants the stone. Malfoy wants the chamber. And they may not be working together, Cedric said slowly. Two different threats, Hermione said. Moving on parallel tracks. Both accelerating, Rowan said. Whatever is in Quirrell, I felt it on the way in through the castle. It's been patient all year. But it's not patient anymore. Harry looked at his hands. They were warm, warmer than they'd been any night yet, with all 7 threads present for the first time, the bond finally complete in a way it hadn't been before tonight. He could feel Rowan's thread now properly, present and real and carrying something ancient and scholarly, and underneath that, something loyal in the way that had been forged by years of acting on it alone. It was a strong thread. He was glad it was there. He looked up. The chamber, he said to Rowan. Can you find it? I know what I was looking for when I accessed the documentation, she said. I know the magical signatures to look for. She paused. But if we find it, we protect it, Harry said. Not control it. Protect it. He looked around the kitchen. The stone is under the trapdoor on the 3rd floor. Whatever is in Quirrell is going to move on it. Dumbledore is managing it from a distance, but I don't think management is going to be enough for much longer. He looked at Rowan. How long before Malfoy finds the chamber independently? I don't know. But he's been here 3 days and he's been walking the school with the eyes of someone looking for something specific. Then we need to find it first, Harry said. Tonight. The castle, as Harry had established over 3 months, was responsive. Cooperative, even, in the specific way that an ancient building could be cooperative when it recognized what was walking its corridors. He pressed his palm flat against the wall of the 4th floor corridor, the one with the fresco, the one with the alcove that contained the mirror, and asked. Not in words. In the same way he'd asked the feathers to come down, the same way he'd felt the floors and staircases from the fresco's stones. He asked the castle where the thing Ravenclaw had built to protect what she'd built was. The castle showed him. Not a direction, more like a path made of warmth, the magical equivalent of a trail of breadcrumbs laid down 1,000 years ago for exactly this purpose. Ravenclaw, he thought, had known this moment would come. She'd left the path specifically for the mark-bearer who came after Aldrich. This way, he said. They followed him, all 7, through corridors that rearranged themselves subtly to create a passage, through a part of the 5th floor that Harry had never accessed and suspected most people hadn't either, through a door that was disguised as a bookcase until Harry touched the 3rd shelf from the bottom and it remembered it was a door. The room behind it was not what any of them had expected. Not a vault or a chamber in any dramatic architectural sense. It was round and high-ceilinged and made of the same stone as the rest of the castle, but the stone here had the quality of things built at the foundations, the oldest stones, the weight-bearing ones, the ones the rest of the building grew from. The floor was polished by nothing but time. The walls had carvings, not decorative, structural, the same way load-bearing beams were structural, lines of script in Old English and Latin and something older than both running in continuous spirals from floor to ceiling. At the center of the room was a raised dais, and on the dais was something that was simultaneously a physical object and not quite, a lens of light, like looking at water with the sun at the right angle, except the light wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the stone itself, from the carvings, from the floor. From the same ancient magic that had been humming through Harry's hands since September. Rowan walked to the edge of the dais and looked at it with the expression of someone who has read about something for 2 years and is now standing in front of it. It's a resonance point, she said quietly. The school's magic doesn't just run through the walls. It runs through here. Everything converges, she pointed at the lens of light. Here. The wards, Hermione breathed. All the school's wards pass through this point. Everything the founders built, Rowan confirmed. If you could access this, redirect this, you could replicate the entire protective architecture. Walls, wards, bond infrastructure, everything. She looked at Harry. This is what Malfoy wants. Harry walked onto the dais. The light shifted around him, not dramatically, not explosively, just with the ease of recognition, the way a room shifts when someone walks into it who belongs in it. He felt the school's magic move through his feet, up through his legs, the same familiar warmth but on a different scale, the difference between a candle and the sun it's made of. His hands were very warm. He crouched on the dais and pressed both palms flat against its surface. The room breathed. All 7 of them felt it, even Rowan, who was 3 months behind the others in terms of bond development, felt it like a hand pressed to her sternum, warm and certain. The carvings on the walls lit incrementally, line by line, the script becoming legible to Harry in the way that shouldn't have been possible because he'd never learned Old English or whatever the older script was, but the mark wasn't translating language, it was translating meaning, the bond between him and the castle, the same fundamental connection the bond between him and his 7 was made of. "Child," said the castle, in the way the hat had spoken to him, pressure behind the ears, not sound. "We have been waiting." "I know," Harry said aloud. "The stone. And someone else looking for this place. We know the thing in the turban." A sensation like cold water running under the warmth. "We have known it since it came. We have been holding it away from what it wants." "The stone is under the 3rd floor," Harry said. "How long can you hold?" "Not much longer. It has been waiting for the right moment. The right distraction." Harry looked up at the others. Their faces in the light of the carvings were intent and present, all 7 of them, the complete cord, the full 7-thread bond running through him like a current now, each of them distinct and real. Rowan at the edge of the dais with her arms uncrossed for the first time since she'd arrived. Luna calm and bright. Hermione with her notebook closed for once, watching with her full attention. Neville steady as good soil. Fred and George on either side of the room like mirrors, serious in the specific way they got when something had passed from interesting to important. Cedric standing with the collected composure of someone who had decided where he was and was entirely at peace with it. Harry felt something move through the bond, not his pushing, just the natural consequence of all 7 being together in the seat of the school's power, the bond resonating with the magic around them the way tuning forks resonate. The lens of light at the dais center brightened, not blindingly but meaningfully, and the carvings on the walls were fully illuminated now, all the way to the ceiling. "The bond strengthens the architecture," the castle said. "As it was designed to. As the founder intended. Ravenclaw built this room for the mark-bearer," Harry said. "She built this room because she knew the mark would come again. She knew the school would need it. And the mark-bearer would need the school," Luna said from her position near the wall, reading the carvings as easily as she read the Quibbler. She looked at Harry. "She left instructions." "Show me," Harry said to the castle. The floor of the dais shifted, not physically, but the light that had been diffuse became directed, pointing to a specific section of carved wall that, as Harry stood and walked to it, revealed itself to be less a wall and more a record. A magical record, the kind that stored information the way a pensieve stored memory, not written but lived, Ravenclaw's actual intent pressed into stone. He put his hand on it. He saw the school from the foundation up. He saw Ravenclaw building this room last, when the others thought construction was done, working alone at night with magic that would have been remarkable in any era. He felt what she felt, the certainty that the bond would come again, that the mark would find a child who needed what the school could offer and what the school needed back. He saw her design the room as a gift and a safeguard simultaneously, a recognition point that only the mark-bearer could fully access, that would resist anyone else's attempt to use it the way a lock resists a key that isn't made for it. He saw her right, in the oldest script, in the magic of the stone itself, what the chamber could do when the mark-bearer activated it. He pulled his hand from the wall and stood for a moment, processing. "Harry," Cedric said quietly. "What did you see?" "How to protect the school," Harry said. "And the stone." Simultaneously. He turned to face them. "The chamber can extend the school's wards. Not just maintain them, actively direct them. Lock down specific areas. Reinforce specific points. He looked at Hermione. The trapdoor could be sealed from here. The entire third-floor corridor, protected with something that makes Quirrell, whatever is inside Quirrell, unable to reach it. That keeps the stone secure, Hermione said rapidly. But Quirrell is still in the school, and this room stays hidden from Malfoy if I anchor it, Harry said. If I set a mark here, a claim, the way the original mark-bearer would have done, the room recognizes me as the school's, I don't know the right word, custodian, Rowan said. She was looking at the carvings with wide eyes. The records I found in the Malfoy archive described the role. The mark-bearer as magical custodian of the school's foundation. She looked at Harry. If you anchor yourself to this room, the chamber becomes inaccessible to anyone without your permission. Malfoy could stand in the corridor outside for a year and never find the door. What does it cost? Neville asked. It was exactly the right question. Harry looked at him with the warmth of it. Permanently, he said. Nothing. It's not a sacrifice. It's more like registration. He looked at his hands. The mark is the school recognizing what I am. This is me recognizing the school back. Do it, said 7 voices, in close enough sequence that it was functionally simultaneous. Harry pressed both hands to the dais and let the bond move, not carefully, not controlled in the way that was really fear, but fully, the way he'd moved it with the feathers and then more so, the way he'd moved it with the mirror and then more so, the entire 7-thread current flowing through his hands into the stone of the room that had been waiting 1,000 years for this. The carvings blazed. Not light show blazed, not theatrical, just fully on, the way something is when it's finally doing what it was made to do. The lens at the dais center brightened to something that wasn't quite visible and was more like feeling it with your eyes, the warmth of it moving through the room and out, up through the walls and the floors and the foundations, through the entire body of the castle the way blood moves through a living thing. Harry felt the school settle around him like something taking a deep breath. He felt the wards lock across the third-floor corridor, clean and certain, the same fundamental magic but directed, intentional. He felt the room fold around itself in a way that was less like hiding and more like choosing not to be seen, which was a distinction that mattered. He took his hands off the dais. He felt tired in the way you feel tired after running somewhere, not depleted but used, the good version of it. Done, he said. What happened next happened fast. 40 minutes later, Quirrell tried to access the third-floor corridor. Harry felt it from the Founder's chamber. They'd stayed, Rowan walking the perimeter with her hand on the carved walls, reading, and Hermione copying everything she could see with a quick quotes method she'd adapted to avoid the usual inaccuracy, as a pressure, a pushing against the ward he'd set. Not subtle. Whatever was inside Quirrell had been patient all year and had run out of patience in the last hour, probably feeling the castle's magic move when Harry had anchored the chamber. It knows something changed, Harry said. It's trying the third floor, Cedric confirmed. He had his hand to his chest in the listening posture they all used now, reading the bond for information. Hard. The ward will hold, Harry said, because it wasn't a question, he could feel it holding, the school's magic backing it with 1,000 years of weight. But then Rowan said, Harry. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her yet, and in the 45 minutes since she'd introduced herself she'd already established a pretty clear vocal range, and what he was hearing wasn't in it. He looked at her. She was standing at the wall, her hand on the carvings, and she was reading something. Her expression was the controlled, alarmed expression of someone who has found unexpected information and is processing whether it changes things before speaking, so as not to cause unnecessary panic, which meant it was probably going to cause at least some panic. What? Harry said. The ward on the third floor, she said carefully. When you said it, you locked the corridor. That's correct. But, she traced the carvings. The original design accounts for a situation where the entity trying to breach a ward is not fully, singular. Not fully present in the physical plane. It's not fully alive, Luna said, from her spot near the door. It's less than that. It's a fragment. A fragment of something, Rowan said. Yes. And the ward architecture here is designed for complete physical entities. For full presence magical beings. She looked at Harry. A fragment could slip. Not breach the ward. Slip under it. Because the ward doesn't have a complete thing to catch. 3 seconds of processing time. The stone, Hermione said. Can it still reach the stone? Rowan's expression answered before she did. It can't breach the trapdoor ward, Harry said, standing up from the dais' edge. But, it doesn't need to go through the trapdoor if it can go through the mirror, Rowan said. There's a mention in these carvings of a mirror on the 3rd floor, something Dumbledore brought into the school this year. A mirror that shows desire. She looked at him. Desire strong enough to be architectural. The mirror of Ariste, Hermione said immediately. It's documented, I read about it, it shows you your deepest desire. Dumbledore brought it in as a hiding place for the stone. The design is that only someone who wants to find the stone but not use it can retrieve it from the mirror. But something that is desire, Luna said quietly. Something made entirely of want, for life, for the stone, for restoration, could it use the mirror differently? Harry said to Rowan. I don't know, she said, which from Rowan clearly meant possibly, and we shouldn't risk finding out. Harry was already moving. The 3rd floor corridor was wrong in the way corridors are wrong when something is happening in them that shouldn't be, a quality of used air, of space that has been passed through recently by something large and cold and purposeful. The ward Harry had set on it was intact, he could feel it, the school's magic holding the line, but there was a seam in it, small and specific, the width of a fragment rather than a being, and through the seam the cold thread of Quirrell's occupant ran like smoke under a door. Fluffy was calm. That was the first strange thing. The 3-headed dog, which should have been agitated by whatever had just slipped past its guarding post, was sitting on the trapdoor with its 3 pairs of eyes tracking the door of the corridor and its tail going very slowly because someone had apparently cast a sleeping charm on it from below. Below. It's already in there, Cedric said. Yes, Harry said. He turned to the group, all 7, because they'd all come, which he hadn't needed to ask for, they'd just come, and looked at each of them for a moment. Not a briefing. Just looking. I'm going in, he said. We're going in, Fred said. Obviously, George said. Harry, Hermione said. Whatever is down there, the fragment, if it's in the mirror, I know, Harry said. Do you know what you're going to do? He looked at his hands. I'll know when I'm in front of it, he said. Cedric moved to the trapdoor and opened it. The darkness below had stairs, the ward hadn't created the absence of passage, just the absence of safe passage for the wrong thing, and what came back up from the opening was cold in the inverted fire way Harry had first felt in the corridor junction outside defense class. He jumped down first, because that was the order of things, and landed on stone, and the others came after. The chamber below was different from how he'd imagined it. Not dark, there were candles, hundreds of them, the light they gave off doing nothing useful against the cold. The obstacles ahead, he could see the chess set, the potions, the shapes of things set in sequence, were secondary information, his mind filing them under deal with in order rather than obstacles. What he was navigating toward was the mirror. He could see its glow from across the room, warm gold light against stone, and in front of it a figure that was wrong. Quirrell was there, facing the mirror, but Quirrell's body had the quality of bad taxidermy, still, too still, not the stillness of concentration but the stillness of something being vacated. The turban had come off. What was on the back of the head was, not a face, not exactly, but a face's insistence on existing, a presence pressed against the wrong side of skin like something trying to push through. It hadn't heard them yet. It was focused on the mirror with the terrible concentration of a fragment that has been waiting a long time and can feel the thing it wants within arm's reach. Harry walked forward and didn't hide. "I'd stop there," he said. The thing in Quirrell turned. And Harry saw, for the first time properly, what 10 years ago had looked at his parents and chosen to end them. Not a man. Not a monster. A will, stripped of almost everything that made a person, reduced to what was left when you spent decades pursuing immortality at the cost of everything else: memory, connection, ordinary joy, the ability to be in a room with other people and feel them as real. A will that had been so absolutely committed to continuing that it had hollowed everything else out to make room for the commitment. Red eyes. Or the memory of eyes. A face that was more like the idea of a face than a face. It looked at Harry. And it recognized him in the way it had recognized him in the corridor, with sharp, recalibrating interest, but now also with something else. It had felt the chamber activate. It had felt the wards move. It had felt 7 threads complete and the school's magic shift in response, and it had moved fast because it knew the window was closing, and now Harry was standing between it and the mirror. "The Potter boy," it said, in a voice like frost on glass. "Already more than you should be." "I've been told," Harry said. "The mark of the 7. It studied him with the absolute focus of something that contained nothing but will. "Extraordinary. I had wondered if it would manifest in you, given your mother's work. Given what the sacrifice created. It tilted what served as its head. I want you to understand something, boy. I don't regard you as an enemy. I regard you as a remarkable confluence of circumstances that I would very much prefer not to destroy unnecessarily." "That's very thoughtful of you," Harry said. "The stone," it said, with the directness of something that had no patience left for anything peripheral. "Step aside." "No," Harry said. He felt the 7 threads behind him. They'd fanned out through the chamber, not clustered, instinctively tactical, the bond making them feel each other without needing to see each other. He felt Rowan near the potion room, because she was the one who'd know which potion. He felt Hermione near the chess set because she'd assessed it first. He felt Fred and George's bright double note near the winged key cage because they could cover ground fast. "You are 11 years old," it said. The same observation Malfoy had made. "You cannot." Harry pressed his hands flat against the stone floor of the chamber. The castle was right there. All of it, the weight of 1,000 years, the wards he'd set, the bond of 7 threads, Ravenclaw's foundation, the same deep warm pressure that had breathed out from under his hand at the fresco, right there, available, rooted in the chamber upstairs and running through every stone in the building and coming up through the floor into his palms like water through limestone. He looked up at the fragment wearing Quirrell's emptied body and he said, simply and without performance, "Try." What happened was not a duel in the expected sense. There was no wand. Harry's was in his pocket and he didn't reach for it, because the magic coming through his hands was not wand magic and using a wand would be like trying to carry a river in a bucket. What came out of him when the fragment pushed was the school pushing back, the bond pushing back, all 7 threads and 1,000 years of protective architecture flowing through him as a conduit because that was what the mark was, that was what Ravenclaw had built, a child who was not a weapon but a meeting point between human and ancient magic, between the people he was bonded to and the thing that had built the castle around them. The fragment hit it and recoiled. Not painfully, not dramatically, it simply met something that had more weight than anything it had encountered in decades and could not move through it, the way you can't push through a wall by wanting hard enough. It tried again. And again. Each time with more force, and each time the castle absorbed it with the particular patience of things that have been standing for 1,000 years and have no intention of stopping. "You cannot," it started. "I know," Harry said, and stood up, and reached into the mirror. The stone was in his pocket before he fully understood how he'd gotten it there. The mirror had simply given it to him, the way it was designed to, responding to someone who wanted to find it and not to use it. He looked at it sitting in his palm. Small. Warm. Red. The fragment in Quirrell's face looked at it with the specific quality of someone watching the last thing they needed move out of reach. Harry closed his fingers around it. I'm not going to destroy this, he said. That's not my decision. But you're not getting it tonight. This is not over, it said, and the temperature of the room dropped significantly with the specific feeling of something gathering itself, not for a physical attack but for something older and more fundamental, a magical compression that reminded Harry of the moment before a storm, and then Rowan stepped forward from the potion room with a bottle in her hand, the right potion, the one that had gotten her through, and said something in Latin that was very old and very specific and targeted, and the compression collapsed. Quirrell's body crumpled. The face that wasn't a face screamed, not with sound, with the quality of something tearing, a presence being separated from a host it was no longer strong enough to hold, and then it was moving, dispersing, the fragments scattering like fog in wind. Cold rushed through the room, hard and fast and brief, and then it was gone, and the candles guttered and relit, and Quirrell was on the floor and clearly not going to get up from it in any meaningful way, and the chamber was just a chamber, cold stone and chess pieces and the mirror of Eriste reflecting the backs of 7 people's heads. Harry stood in the silence and breathed. Neville was at his shoulder in 30 seconds. Are you all right? Yes, Harry said. He looked at his hands. The warmth was fading to ambient, the school's magic receding from active to available. Are you? Terrified, Neville said honestly. But yes. Good terrified or bad terrified? Neville thought about it. The kind where you did it anyway, he said. So I think good. Harry looked at the stone in his hand, small and red and apparently the most important object in the world to something that had just spent a year hiding in a professor's head. We should take this to Dumbledore, he said. Agreed, said 6 voices. Rowan, Harry said. She was standing near Quirrell's body, looking at it with the expression of someone taking forensic inventory. She looked up. That thing you did, he said. In Latin. What was that? Sundering charm, she said. Old. Not taught anymore. Severs a parasitic magical attachment from a host. She paused. I've been carrying it for 2 years. Just in case. Her expression did something dry and self-aware. Turns out running toward things is occasionally more useful than running away from them. Occasionally, Fred said. Arguably, George added. Statistically, Hermione said, because she couldn't help it. Harry looked at all of them, standing in the chamber below the school with a defeated possession attempt at their feet and the stone in his hand, 7 threads warm and present in his chest, complete for the first time. He didn't have words for it. He didn't try to find them. He just looked, and they looked back, and that was enough.